Our 2020 Global Communications Report on New Activism points out that inside most companies, senior executives have the final say in determining how and when to engage on a social issue. And increasingly, they're listening to their employees, who are definitely finding their voice on a variety of topics. At denim giant Levi Strauss, employee activism is embedded into the company's DNA. And as Kelly McGinnis tells us, it all started with their founder.
Levi Strauss himself, for his first time he turned a profit, he made a donation to a children's organization, which was an orphanage at the time that we still support today. And that DNA of being a part of the community has just always been a part of who we are. And I think it also is the people that we then attract. So the brand is all about authentic self-expression and finding a way to really be your best voice and to use your voice to make an impact. And there's so many examples of it that I think that collectively we all feel a sense of we're part of something bigger than ourselves. And as a result, we try to push that continuing going forward. And I think that it is very much a part of what the culture is about at the company.
Welcome to PR Future, the podcast that delivers interesting insights into the dynamic world of public relations. Our first few episodes address the findings of our Global Communications Report and take a deep dive into new activism to better understand how activists are using traditional and digital PR tools to deliver powerful messages. Today, we're speaking with Kelly McGinnis, Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer of Levi Strauss and Company. Her company has long been a pioneer in corporate activism, weighing in on controversial issues and partnering with activist groups. But lesser known is Levi's extensive employee engagement and corporate advocacy. Today we'll learn why employee involvement is key to their success in forming authentic partnerships and how Levi Strauss uses employee ideas to create change. I'm Fred Cook from the USC Center for Public Relations, and this is PR Future.
What I found very quickly about joining Levi's is two things. Number one, it's a culture that really fits for me. There are passionate people. They are generally incredibly kind. There is very little internal competitiveness. And so it's a great place to feel like you're a part of a team. And then on the other side, I really didn't feel like, having worked for very big companies in the past, I didn't feel like there was any trade-off, because there's something really magical about Levi's with a brand that is of the scale that it is. Our revenue is significantly smaller than other companies that I've worked for, and also our workforces. And so you can have a huge influence inside the company in a very short time frame, and you can do it on a company that still matters and still shows up in headlines alongside companies that have extra zeros in their revenue line. So it's a really magical mix of getting to work on something big, but to do it in a manageable form.
Levi Strauss has always had a reputation as a corporation that gets involved with social issues and takes a stand on social causes. Was that part of what appealed to you when you first started? Were you aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was very aware of the brand and what the brand meant to people and how passionate they were. It just takes like one little scratch of investigation to get an appreciation for how important the values of the company are and its historical focus on what we call profits through principles, which means that every decision that we make throughout the company starts from a place of really thinking about those values and are we doing right by the communities that we serve. That was an incredibly attractive component of it. I don't think that from the outside you really fully appreciate how inherent it is to the company's DNA until you become a part of it. One, when you come to employee orientation, people show up with such incredible high expectations around our values. And I find, as the person leading internal communications in particular, we have to live up to those expectations, and it really pushes you. And then externally, our reputation is so strong, you feel like you're a steward of something that's much bigger than the tenure of any one leadership team. And being able to live up to the legacy and expectations is both an incredible privilege, and it's also something that we really hold ourselves accountable to. And it's been such a tumultuous time, particularly here in the US the last several years. It hasn't been a hard thing to do. It's been very natural for us to be able to make the decisions on where we should weigh in, how we can make a difference, and can we make it have any influence.
Kelly says that most of the ideas on where, when, and how to weigh in on social issues come from their employees.
Of course, we have a 2x2 matrix and a set of criteria that we've all said this is the decision-making criteria that we go through. But the real is that it's a case-by-case decision, and it's based on where we think we can make a difference. Almost every one of the very pioneering decisions that we've taken ahead of our time have been first and foremost initiated by our employees. Bob Haas was the CEO back in the 80s, and you ask, how did you find yourself on the front lines of the AIDS epidemic and the only corporate leader who was out, he was in the lobby handing out condoms. And he says, I was there because our employees told me I needed to lend a voice and I needed to make a difference. And if you follow that red thread for each one of these examples, that's where it starts. And we're most authentic and we have the strongest voice when our employees knock on the door and say, how are we going to make a difference in this area? And that's been the case time and time again on the issues that matter to us and where we've been able to make a big difference.
In Levi Strauss, you have an activist CEO, you have an activist culture, and you must have a lot of activist employees. Do you have a policy or do you have guidelines for them in terms of what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate for people to be saying and doing?
First and foremost, we really believe in people using their authentic voice. And we've even have a campaign that's all about using your voice. And so we can't say that externally if we don't live it internally. And we know that inside our organization. And so we work really hard to encourage, to create a culture where people feel comfortable speaking up, saying what they believe, and being able to contribute to the conversation and to the culture that we're developing. So, that comes from everything from we do a monthly, lately we've been doing it every other week, all hands meeting where people, it really is an ask me anything format. We call it chips and beer because our CEO's named Chip and we serve beer. But the intention is that everybody can say or express anything that they need or that they want to share. And we carry that forward. We have a very robust and influential set of employee resource groups. So those affinity groups bring forward their opinions and ideas, and they hold us to a really high standard that they can not only be supportive of each other, but that most importantly, that they can have an influence on the business. And so I don't know that we call ourselves activists, but we certainly feel like advocates. And we want to hear and try to create an environment where people's voices can be heard.
And what role does communications play in this process? If it's sort of bubbling up from the employees, where does communications get involved in the decision-making process?
We feel very responsible, and I think people across the organization know that we are a team that's listening to what are people caring about, what are they hearing and seeing, and then often we're the intersection point where we bring sort of the diverse points of view together. So for example, I know you had Brendan on the podcast in the past, and when we made a decision to take a stand on gun violence prevention, that was a tough one. That was a brand new issue for us. And there was a distinctive level of stakeholders. And I would say that when we first weighed in, it was much more controversial than it even is today. The way that we made that decision was first and foremost, we heard from our employees. It was our store managers who were saying they didn't feel safe when customers were coming in. And I mean, it's sort of silly, but if you're going to try on jeans, you're going to take off your pants. And so if you're carrying a gun, it's not particularly safe interaction. And, we did have, as we were starting to think about how do we address that, a customer in one of our stores, in fact, did shoot himself in the foot. It sounds like a cliche, and it was a good thing that it could have been much more dangerous situation that could have impacted an innocent bystander, but it really pushed us to say we want to take a stand. And you layer that with, this has always been a youth brand, a brand that's really there with the communities that are pushing us to make a difference. And so we had taken a stand and asked people politely, kind of following other large retailers, to please not bring guns into our stores. But then after the series of events, particularly with Parkland, we felt like the youth were making a difference and getting momentum. And we thought that we could help have their pleas to our generation be heard. And so we lent our voice and took a stand as an early corporate voice on that issue. And over time, we've seen that more and more companies have followed and joined, and we've been able to use that muscle as sort of a coalition builder to bring other companies on board, and we've done that time and time again. So one of the things that we feel pride about inside the company is that when we lead, others will follow. And what we mean by that is we'll make it a little less controversial for other companies to lend their voices to these really tough issues. And we've done that over decades, time and time again. We have examples of that.
Were you worried about sales? I mean, a lot of people wear Levi's who I assume own guns or carry guns. Was that a big consideration in making this decision?
It was. I think that, we had a series of conversations with our board to really say this is a new issue and does it make sense for us to weigh in here? And of course, people ask the question of you're going to alienate folks. But when we really thought about it, we've proven time and again that we've been on the right side of history on these types of issues. So our CEO likes to talk about the fact that when the Boy Scouts banned gay troop leaders, you think about that today, you can't even think that that would be a reality. But at the time, it was incredibly controversial, and we lost a lot of consumers, and we had a letter writing campaign that was targeted at us. And similarly, the support for responsible gun ownership, it's kind of a myth that this is this big controversial issue. The numbers are in the very high percentages, like above 80, above 90% of both gun owners and non-gun owners who believe in responsible gun ownership. And therefore, it's not nearly as controversial as it sounds. It's a very small group of very vocal folks who rally up a lot of noise on this issue. And so we really looked at it with a long view toward what's right for history and how will history judge us. And that's what we leaned on in making that decision.
In episode 2 of PR Future, Brendan Duff, co-founder of March for Our Lives, explained why his group was so excited to partner with Levi's. Now, Kelly tells us about the decision to partner with his youth movement from the corporate side of things.
I would say there were two things. We were really thoughtful about what our goal was. So for us, it was to amplify youth voices and to really be narrowly focused on a set of policies. And then we just went out and educated ourselves. So we spend a tremendous amount of time listening to the organizations that are having an influence in an issue. And just really, we approach it with humility. And we say we don't know what we don't know, but we want to understand and we want to help. And we've been able to find great educators on all of the issues that we've worked with and to narrow in on where can we make a difference. We're a small company on a relative scale, and so we never have huge dollars. And so we know our voice is one of the assets that we have to bring to bear. So we think about it holistically and we say, knowing what we have to help, where can we make the biggest difference? And we listen closely to and get educated by the folks who've dedicated their lives to these issues. And that has helped us tremendously. The other thing is that because our foundation and our community affairs organizations have been working on the front lines of social justice issues for decades, we have great relationships. We're working with a lot of these advocates who are working at the intersection of a lot of these issues on a regular basis, and they are trusted counselors and folks that we learn from as we go.
And how do you think this purpose-driven approach to communications and to your values impacts the sales of your products? Do you feel like it has a big impact on sales over time?
We think it's shifting very quickly. So we've been leaders in sustainability for many years and decades, in fact. And for a long time, consumers kind of looked at it as one of my colleagues calls it gift with purchase. Like they weren't going to make a decision based on your sustainable practices, but more and more people expect it. And so from our perspective, we would see lots of research that would say that I'm first and foremost going to decide on a purchase I'm going to make on how does it make me feel and how do I look in it? It's a pair of jeans. You care about that. But what we are seeing is that those attitudes are shifting incredibly quickly, and people's attitudes toward sustainability and their consumer choices and really making conscientious choices with where they spend their money and doing it with companies that they find that are like-minded, that those are moving so quickly to the top of the consideration set in a way that it was always important, but it might not have pushed you over, that I think that we're going to come out, particularly out of the pandemic crisis, with a different set of perspectives on values.
And when you see a situation explode like Black Lives Matter has across our country, do you feel that as an organization, you understand that better because of your past experience working with activists, that you have a better feel for what to say and do in a situation like the one we're experiencing today?
I think we're all struggling right now and trying to do the best that we can. So, I mean, we're very grateful that we have a strong, influential Black employee resource group that was willing to have very frank conversations. And so, from a leadership perspective for us, we started by listening to our employees and we asked, how is this impacting you? What can we do? And what is the experience of working here? And it was disappointing to find out that we don't always, for all the values that we all believe in, they don't always show up internally in a consistent way. And so we realized that we have to make changes inside our organization, not just in hiring practices and representation, which is absolutely important, but also making sure that our behaviors and our values are in sync with those intentions as well. And so no, Fred, I wouldn't say that we know better than anyone else, but I would say that we're incredibly grateful to have existing infrastructure and relationships in place, both inside the organization and externally, to help us navigate these areas and to figure out what's next. And that starts with our employees, but it also leads to a lot of the advocates that we've been working with for decades on social justice issues and giving their counsel as well.
Do you think some corporations are skeptical or afraid of talking to activist groups because of their preconceptions that they're going to be the enemy?
I can't say how others are making their decisions. What we found is engaging and understanding where people are coming from helps us to be more educated in how we handle it. There's always going to be areas where you agree to disagree. And I do think that the most challenging thing in a corporate environment is having a thick skin, right? And I think from an executive perspective, particularly at a company that is as values driven and as visible as ours, it's not always easy to be on the other side of activists or organizations who don't agree with some of your business decisions. And really, I think for us, the way that we navigate that is feeling really good about, were they authentically made with our stakeholders in mind? And do we believe in the decision that we made? And if we do, then we can stand behind it. But of course, I think we all need a little thicker skin.
And when we ask communicators who the activists, the new activists are, they said they were younger, more tech savvy, more urban, more diverse, and more female. Does that reflect what you're seeing out there?
I think so. I mean, I think that we think about it on a broader scale, and certainly for us, from a community perspective and sort of the consumers that we are trying to attract, they're absolutely younger, they're more global, and they have a global perspective. One of the things that I think is fascinating is our US Instagram handle is followed around the world. The vast majority of the folks who are following that are following it from outside the United States. And so they're absolutely connected online. They're socially aware and they hold us accountable. And what we hear from them is they want to be a part of companies and efforts that are making things better. And so that's what we think about from our messaging as well. Now, that said, we realize people are going to come out. I mentioned the pandemic earlier. They're going to come out with fewer dollars than they've had in the past. And so it's on us to earn to be one of those small number of things and small number of brands that they'll be able to spend and invest in.
And one of the reasons for the growth of activism people cited was sort of the lack of action from the government or the loss of faith in political institutions. And it looks like consumers and citizens are going to be turning more and more to business for answers and leadership on some of these societal issues. Do you think that's a positive change?
I think it's inevitable, and there has been this ongoing expectation that business think more broadly about stakeholders and that we also participate in filling some of the leadership gaps. And so, one of the things our CEO's name is Chip Berg. He is a very active voice on social issues. And I think that he's been very committed to that there is a responsibility when you become the steward of a brand of this scale and visibility and influence, that with that, the heritage and the legacy of standing up to how we have been strong on values remains important. And so he has leaned in on that, and he has been willing to say that there's a broader expectation for business, that it's not just about business, but it's about how do you deliver on your values. And as a result, we've seen that we've been able to make a really big impact.
Along with listening to employees and partnering with activists, Kelly works within the business world to foster change through corporate coalitions.
Fred, you know, I'm incredibly proud of the coalition building that we've been able to do across the business community. We talked a little bit about gun violence prevention. And if you rewind to last year, when the House was voting on a bill, it was called House Bill 8, it was primarily universal background checks. We were able to rally 4 CEOs to sign a letter to the House. You fast forward after a very tragic summer last year, and we were able to rally more than 150 CEOs, and then another 100 joined us after that was published in a similar letter to the Senate. So that role of the business, making sure that businesses' voice is heard on social issues, is something that we've been really proud of. Similarly, on voting, we partnered with Patagonia. There's a issue here in the US where in the top 3 reasons that people don't participate in voting is they feel like they have a compromise between their paycheck and being able to go to the polls. And so we partnered with Patagonia around the midterms on a challenge called Time to Vote, where companies made a commitment that they'd make sure that their employees had time off to vote. And they could execute it however they chose to execute it. Like some people close down their stores and make it essentially a holiday. Others make sure that their hourly employees have paid time off. You can execute it however it makes sense, but you make sure that your employees have time to vote. And, you know, at the midterms in 2018, we got more than 470 companies. We're reinitiating that effort. We're on target to have almost 1,000 to join us this time. And it's more important than ever, particularly with the social justice issues that we're facing, for us all to be able to use our vote and for that to have an opportunity. So that coalition building is something that we've been able to do to really look at where can the business community influence on these social issues.
And we found even the activist community believes voting is much more important than protesting in order to create long-lasting change.
Because it's hard to make voting sexy, right? Like it really is. It feels like insufficient and far away, and it really has to be the first and foremost consideration if we want our democracy to work.
And what will Levi be doing to encourage that?
You know, we try to keep voting nonpartisan, and that's incredibly important for us. But we basically do the whole toolkit in terms of supporting get out the vote. So we start with CEO and thought leadership, and that's the work that we've done on Time to Vote. We have our foundation has given more than $1 million to help fight against voter suppression. Our community organization will partner both to educate our employees on voting issues, but also to make sure that we're supporting organizations on the ground. And then what's really exciting is our marketing organization brings their resources to bear as well. So they'll run television commercial, they'll do a collection in the stores and online that will encourage people to vote with a proceeds going to help support a nonprofit. During the midterms, we had voter registration in the stores. We'll bring every resource that we have to bear to help encourage young people to get out to vote in the fall.
And how can they find out more about all of this?
MakeTimeToVote.org.
And it seems like the young activists today want change. They don't want to simply raise awareness for an issue and have it go away. They want something done about it. And we're seeing that now, I think, with the racial injustice. We're seeing it with the gun violence. Do you think that's going to have a positive outcome long term? Do you think over time things are really going to be meaningfully different because of the activism?
I think we all certainly hope so, right? So it feels like it's different, and it feels like things are shifting and things are changing for sure. So we saw record turnout in the midterms. I hope we see it again later this year when it comes to voting. I think that, you know, we haven't seen federal action on gun violence prevention, but we have seen so many state laws that have been impacted and so much progress that has happened at that level that we can only anticipate that more is going to happen. And certainly there's overwhelming support for those types of moves. And then in terms of the moment in time where we are right now, I feel like every single company is feeling that this is a different moment in time and they want to be a part of supporting and not perpetuating racial injustice that's been here and has been a part of our communities for too long.
As a leader in this space, you must get calls from your colleagues at other companies asking for your advice on how to manage a particular issue or how to reach out to an activist group. How do you coach people in that regard? What have you learned by being a pioneer that you can share with other people that are trying to figure their way through this social purpose stuff?
I think I ask for more advice than I give, to be honest, Fred. And I'm really grateful that I have a huge cohort of communications professionals who are available. And when we're trying to wrestle through an issue, who are happy to pick up the phone, to get on the phone, to compare notes and talk about how we're navigating this through. I've done that from the beginning of this crisis. So on the weekend, when we were all trying to figure out what's going to happen with our stores, we were talking to each other and our peers who were making those decisions in other leadership teams and bringing those ideas forward and thinking them through. On the advocacy issues, one of my, as I like to call my side hustles, is I spend a tremendous amount of time trying to recruit other companies to, whether it's time to vote or to join us on gun violence prevention and other issues. And so it really is much more organic than sort of a mentorship or coaching. It's a, why would you consider doing this? And how do you tell this story inside your leadership, in your boardroom? And what does that look like for us? And how might it apply to your organization? And what have you learned along the way? And what kind of pushback do you anticipate or not anticipate? And that's the way those conversations happen. They're very natural. And I learn from every one of them, I have to be honest.
Where do you see this activism going over the next 5 years? Do you think it's going to become a more powerful force? Is what we're seeing in the streets of America today sort of just the beginning of what we're going to see in the future?
What we're hearing first and foremost from our employees is they're going to hold us to a standard that's as high as the values that we espouse, and that we need to authentically deliver our behaviors behind that. And that needs to be in our marketing communications. That needs to be in our workplace practices. It needs to be through every way that we think about how we operate. I think that's a reflection of how competitive it is to find great talent. We're going into a really tough economic environment and we want to keep our best people. And so we're going to work really hard to live up to those standards. And I think those are bleeding into consumer expectations as well. And so I think the combination of how people are going to choose to invest their time, where they want to work, and where they're going to invest a finite number of dollars are all going to collectively line up to put pressure on all of us to live authentically against those values and to be able to talk about and to feel confident that you're living up to them. And then if those two things feel aligned, then it's really a decision of, are you the right organization culturally, either for a consumer or for an employee? And it feels like the right level of change that we should all feel a sense of urgency to live up to.
And Kelly, what about you personally? What do you see for the future for you in this job, and where you would like to take the communications at Levi's?
It's a good question. Before the crisis hit, I think we were really thinking hard about sort of what's next for us and how do we really lean in and make sure that we build on all of the great credibility and also influence that we have built. Right now, it really is a level of challenge to the business that I have never seen in my time in corporate America. And so really making sure that we shore up the business is first and foremost, and using communications as a strategic partner to help do that and make sure that we come out stronger. We're going to be smaller, but how do we come out stronger from the crisis, and how is comms at the table helping to influence and support that? But to do it in a way that we don't lose our visibility to the values that are truly our differentiator. One of the things that comes to me, Fred, is that when we were preparing for our IPO a little more than a year ago, one of the things that you were starting to hear were sort of these whispers in the back of the room where people would say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. We'll do a lot less of that, meaning that we wouldn't be as free to speak up on our values and other things. And in fact, what we did, and I was so proud of our CEO and our CFO, they made a decision before they went out on the roadshow to say that there's enough investors out there that we want to find the ones who are long-term focused and who are like-minded. And so we're not going to flinch or change on our positions and leading with our values and being a pioneer in stepping forward on social advocacy. And that really was incredibly motivating and inspiring to us as an employee organization. And it has continued to fuel us, and it has been very much at front of mind as the decisions that have been made as we've gone through the crisis as well. And so for me personally, it feels like a huge responsibility to make sure that we continue to be stewards, that we use the resources and influence that are available to us to help drive change, to bring urgency to our organization, but also bring it to our industry and the communities that we operate in. And so it's exciting, it's daunting, and it feels like I'm learning a lot every day.
Kelly's work to weave activism and advocacy into the fabric of Levi Strauss has helped the company live up to its reputation of earning profits through principles. By listening to employees' opinions, establishing activist partnerships, and leading corporate coalitions, Levi proves that corporate activism can be a very effective business strategy. Thanks for tuning in to PR Future, a progressive podcast created for PR professionals by PR professionals. To learn more, tap the link in the show notes to download your copy of New Activism, and subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Today's episode was recorded live from Chicago and produced remotely in Los Angeles by Ron Antoinette, Zazu Lippert, and Manuelita Maldonado, all from the USC Center for Public Relations. I'm your host, Fred Cook, and this is PR Future.